Bulls Nation, not too long ago on this YouTube channel, I discussed depth of the Chicago Bulls and how I believe depth will be very important for the upcoming season and why I believe this system could work very well with some of the players that we have coming off of the bench for the Chicago Bulls. And in that video, I mentioned something that I think should be further discussed in relation to the Chicago Bulls, and that is defense. At the end of the day, last year was one of the worst defensive displays from the Chicago Bulls in the NBA, and today I want to discuss why I feel that could potentially change with this current roster that we have today. So without further ado, let's talk about the Chicago Bulls and their defense in this video. Let's do it. What's going on, everybody? It's the Aidan Sports Show, and welcome back to another video. Today, we've got a Chicago Bulls related video referring to some of the defense that we'll be discussing today in relation to the plays that we have, as well as the balance of defense that we have with the Chicago Bulls, and whether or not I believe it will be better than last season. Spoiler alert, I think it will be. But again, we're going to be discussing all this in the video today. But before we get started, please like and subscribe to the Aidan Sports Show YouTube channel. Turn notifications on and let me know in the comments below your thoughts about the potential defensive capabilities the Chicago Bulls can end up pulling off in this upcoming season. Now, defense means everything in the NBA at the end of the day. If you don't have a good defensive team, no matter how good your offense is, if you're scoring 120 points per game, but you're letting in 122, you're going to lose a lot more games than you do win. And it is simple as that. And the Chicago Bulls have had this issue for quite some time. Again, everything seems to start when Jimmy Butler and Wade and Rondo, after that team disbanded and Jimmy Butler got traded from the Chicago Bulls, that's when most of the issues began with our defensive displays. We were consistently one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA. Funnily enough, rebounding wise, we weren't too bad. We were always a decent rebounding team, but defensively, we were definitely one of the worst, and last year remains true. Now, we did end up winning 9 more games from the Jim Boylan era to the Billy Donovan era. We won 9 more extra games. However, I think many people could argue if we ended up improving that defensive display with the Chicago Bulls, better systems in place, maybe better players to trade for defensive capabilities, we just may have gotten into the play-in tournament and potentially the playoffs. Because I think offensively, at that time, we were one of the better teams in the NBA. Simple as that. Offensively, we were a really, really good NBA team, but defensively, we could not seem to stop anybody from scoring on us, and that was always a big issue. Now, will this year be a different scenario? First things first, I want to look at last year, and I kind of want to look at some of the players that we had, because at the end of the day, I've said in the depth video, which you should go check out before you watch this one, I said that it feels good that the Chicago Bulls will finally be playing like a team again. It feels like we have a complete team. It feels like we have a balanced team. And that's not necessarily because every single player on the team is star-studded. In fact, a lot of the bench players have points to prove. A lot of bench players haven't gotten opportunities on other teams. It's not because of the fact that they are well-known, capable players. The fact is that these players are really good on the defensive side of the ball, and that's what makes many of us so happy, because we haven't had a good defensive team for a long time. So when we're bringing in players that we see defensively can be very reliable for the Chicago Bulls, when you bring in the Derrick Jones Jr.'s, when you bring in the Alize Johnsons, when you bring in the players like Alex Caruso, when you bring in the Lonzo Balls, when you're bringing all these players that have a good defensive reputation to them, instantly you think we should be a better defensive team just because of the quality of the players in the positions defensively. And that is why, that's the first reason why I think the Chicago Bulls will have an improved defense over last year. And again, it's not really hard to get an improved defense over last year, but I'm talking about dramatically improvement. I definitely see that being a solid case for the Chicago Bulls. The second thing I want to talk about is last year's team was just not good defensively because we just didn't have the balance and the right players in place to play the defense that we wanted to play. At the end of the day, we had a starting lineup of Kobe White, Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, either Larry Markin or Thaddeus Young at times, Nikola Vucevic or Wendell Carter, depending on the trade deadline. And the reality is, that's not a great defensive team. Nikola Vucevic isn't a terrific defender, which he's still going to be on the team. Kobe White and Zach LaVine as a duo defensively just did not live up to the expectation. Patrick Williams was in his first year, so no matter how good or average he was at defense, it's his first year, which means he's not going to be the best version of himself he can be. Larry Markkinen, we all have seen, is not a great defender no matter what position you put him in. And obviously Thaddeus Young is a solid defender depending on the situation that you play him in. And these are definitely things that you need to take into consideration, not to mention that the bench had a lot of, I guess, unreliable players defensively. Satoransky is another player that we see could be capable and not always the best defender because of his size and I guess his speed when it comes to guarding some smaller guards. He did struggle and it definitely showed at times. So we didn't have enough players to really help, and the two-way players is what I'm talking about here, because we had really good offensive players. Thaddeus Young, really good offensive player. Tomas Satoransky, really good offensive player. Obviously, Kobe White, a really good offensive player. Zach LaVine, an all-star level player. Nikola Vucevic, an all-star level player. Offensively, these guys can all shine through, but defensively, they just did not seem to work together. And that is definitely something that I believe Billy Donovan should be focusing on in the next year as well, because defense is a structure. I give the example of the New York Knicks. The New York Knicks is a team that finished 4th in the NBA season last year, and the New York Knicks did very well, one of the best defensive teams in the NBA. Now, when you look at their team, you don't see terrific defense by individual players. I mean, Derrick Rose is a great player, but not really known for outstanding defense. Julius Randle, at one time, was one of the worst defensive forwards in the NBA. Many people said it. Many people made fun of him for that. And of course, these guys worked very hard to play defense. Derrick Rose is a much better defender, I think, now than when he was at the start of his career, to be honest. But the reality is, when it comes to the defense, it's about structure. It's about the structure of the defensive plan and allowing these players to follow the structure to perfection. And that's why Tom Thibodeau played a very big part in how the Knicks finished 4th and how they made it to their first NBA playoffs in a very, very long time. His structure was able to help the New York Knicks. Now, I hope that we have a similar structure, not compared to Tom Thibodeau, but a similar defensive game plan where all players involved can focus on perfecting that game plan, and we can have a very good defensive team with Billy Donovan, who is one of the better defensive coaches in the NBA. Now it's time, with the players that we have on this team, that we can go out and show the Chicago Bulls a really good defensive team. And thirdly, I want to discuss the balance of the Chicago Bulls, because as I said before, it feels good to have a team again, and a team requires balance. And I think the balance works very well compared to last year to this year. It's night and day. This balance for the Chicago Bulls, I think, is going to be pretty solid, because at the end of the day, as I said, they're not standout players. They have points to prove. They need opportunities. But we have 4, 5 really good offensive players on this team. We have 4 or 5 pretty solid defensive players on this team. And we have a couple players that could do a little bit of both. And that's exactly what the Chicago Bulls should be thriving on. The fact that there's a balance in this team that I don't think we've seen in a long, long time. So balance means everything. Balance means we could have a top 10 offense and defense. And that's what we should be aspiring to do. Having a balance defensively while being able to put the ball in the bucket is what most teams aspire to have. Because if you have a good balance, you have chances to compete for championships. If you have one fantastic offensive team, top 10, top 5 NBA offensive team in the NBA, you have a 30 defense. As good as you are offensively, you're not winning a championship. You're not going to come close. You need to have balance in the team. You need to be able to have a good structure defensively, just as good as the offense. So far, we have had good offense. We've had Zach LaVine average 28 points per game, Nikola Vucevic averaging 23 points per game, Kobe White averaging 16 points per game, Thaddeus Young averaging over 10 points per game, Satoransky averaging close to 10 points per game. You had that last year. You had the offense. The offense was present, the offense was there, and the offense was good. And that's exactly what we wanted to see. We had some really good highlight plays offensively last year. We were in very close games because our offense carried the load and the bench helped us and all of these things. But now, we have the balance of the offense and the defense. So what I expect from this season, I expect us to be from one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA to probably, I would say, at least within the top half of the league and potentially in the top 10. Because the reality is that's what the Chicago Bulls are going to need if we're going to make a significant impact in the NBA. Because our offense will get there. Our offense is there. And I think even with the chemistry issues that we may have at the beginning of the season, our offense is not going to be stunted from that. Because we have too many skillful offensive players for us to be, I guess, a poor offensive team. But defensively, having the balance and being able to work on that from the beginning is an essential part of the team. Because if we can get that defense going, we can get everybody on the same page. We could get everybody focusing on one defensive scheme and allowing them to perfect it. When in the end, we could become a top 10 defensive team. We could become the better half of the league defensively. And we could show to the rest of the league that we are a force to be reckoned with around the league. And that's exactly what the Chicago Bulls should be aiming to do. Not to mention our best player, Zach LaVine, should be a better defender this year compared to last year and 2 years ago. 2 years ago, from Jim Boylan era to the first year of Billy Donovan, he was a better defender. Many people might not acknowledge that, but on a 1v1 basis, I feel Zach LaVine was a better defender last year than 2 years ago. Having his time in the Olympics in a very tough situation where every bucket counts and all defensive plays matter the most, Zach LaVine was one of the players being praised by everybody of how good his defense was. So I expect that the defensive display you saw from Zach LaVine in the Olympics should very well make a big contribution to his defensive side of the game with the Chicago Bulls. It's a long season, so the reality is there will be some missteps, there will be some mistakes. Our defense is not going to work every single night, but the defense is something we really need to pride ourselves on. And we have players that pride themselves on defense on this team now. Again, most of that bench prides themselves on defense, prides themselves on rebounds, pride themselves on hard work. The offensive side of the game, we have a lot of players there, but a lot of our players also pride themselves on two-way capabilities. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you, this defense could be very, very good for the Chicago Bulls. And of course, as I say in every video, it's not going to be perfect. There's nothing, no team is going to be perfect in the NBA. Whether you're a championship team or you're a tanking team, you're not going to be perfect. No team's going to be perfect. There are going to be issues that we still need to work on. And the ability to take pride in the defensive side of the ball is something the Chicago Bulls should be working on. And that's exactly what we've gone out and got the players to do. Now it's time for them to buy into the system, buy into the defensive schemes, buy into the offensive schemes. And we've got a cracking team in our hands. And let's see if that's what they're able to do. Thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe if you're new. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, ladies and gentlemen. Defense is a very strong component to any team in the NBA. You need defense if you're going to win championships. Even the best of the best offensive teams, if they don't play defense, they will struggle to win championships. So championships, even though, let's be honest, offensively, we're in a stage of the NBA right now where an offense can carry you to a championship. However, as I said before, if you're letting in 122 points, but you're letting another team drop 124 or 130, and you're dropping a career amount of points, but you're letting just as much points go in, it's a two-way street. You need two-way players. You need players that will play defense and play offense, and that's exactly how championships are formed. The Lakers 2 years ago, as good as they were offensively, they were the top defense in the NBA, and that's how their championship was won. Both sides of the ball needs to be concentrated. Both sides of the ball needs to be focused on. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to lie. When I look at this team, I see the offense and the defensive side of the ball for the Chicago Bulls to be one of the better teams in the NBA at this point. Things can change. Things can be proven wrong and right. We're going to have to wait and see. But offense is very strong for this team. You have 4 players that could average 20 points per game on this team. Potentially more if you consider maybe Kobe White if he gets significant game time. Lonzo Ball could probably get to the point where he's around that mark, a little bit lesser than that mark, maybe a 17, 18 point per game player. Who knows? The reality is we have a good offense, and it's time to show that we have a good defense, and that is what's going to change our winning ways for the Chicago Bulls. Defense is something we need to focus on, keep our eyes on, and watch out for. And if they're not doing a good job, then there's some players, maybe even the coaching staff, that does need to be called out for that. But we'll wait and see, of course, in due time. Take care.